A Journey Through the History of Property. Chapter 1. The Primeval State of Commonality. 1. Humanity's Infancy in Tropical Forests. Property didn't start with a fence. It didn't begin with a wall or a legal document. The story of human possession begins in the emerald twilight of the primeval forest. Picture this. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and crushed ferns. This is humanity's infancy, what scholars call the lower stage of savagery. Our ancestors weren't masters of the land. They were merely inhabitants, living in a fragile embrace with nature. For thousands of years, trees weren't resources to be harvested. They were sanctuaries. Giant predators prowled the forest floor below, so our ancestors lived above, high in the vast canopies of tropical and subtropical forests. In this world among the branches, territory was fluid, like shadows cast by the sun. No one could claim a branch as their own. No one owned a grove or a clearing. The forest was immense, breathing, alive. It belonged to everyone, which means it belonged to no one. Human groups were small then, nomadic, driven by the rhythm of seasons. The forest provided everything: shelter, protection, food. Nature's bounty seemed endless, so the idea of exclusion never took root. The very heart of private property hadn't yet sprouted. There was no mine. The environment was a universal commons. Imagine a man standing before a tree declaring it his exclusive domain. To our ancestors, this would have been nonsense, like a bird claiming the sky or a fish claiming the ocean. This was a time of pure social immersion. The individual wasn't yet a distinct economic actor. They were a cell within the tribal body. Life was a collective struggle for survival, and the tropical forest? It was the great unpartitioned nursery of the human spirit. Here, in the deep green silence of prehistory, humanity practiced its first form of ownership, the shared right to exist within the wild. 2. The shared consumption of wild herbs and roots. In this silent green world, eating was the first social ritual. Long before markets or storehouses, the economy was simple. It was dictated by the stomach. There was no such thing as a private pantry. The forest floor was a tangled carpet. Wild herbs, succulent roots, fallen fruits. It served as a universal table, no seats reserved. Picture a small band moving through dense undergrowth, their eyes trained to spot the subtle glint of a wild berry, the specific shape of a nourishing tuber. When food was discovered, the finder didn't claim it, not in the modern sense. There was no boundary of ownership between the hand that plucked and the mouths of the group. Under the laws of primeval communism, to find was to provide for all. Consuming these wild gifts was a shared ceremony of survival, almost instinctive. Philosophers call this the positive community. Nature's abundance, though sometimes scarce in seasonal cycles, made hoarding pointless. Why would you exclude others from a patch of herbs? Individual survival was impossible without the collective. Mine didn't exist because the self wasn't yet isolated. The individual was merely a digestive organ of the tribe. A root dug from the earth was instantly transformed from natural object to social one, passed from hand to hand until the group's hunger was satisfied. The perishable nature of food reinforced this. Wild herbs wither, roots decay. Without preservation techniques, before smoking meats or drying grains, wealth couldn't accumulate. You couldn't be rich in wild berries. You could only be full. The human body itself was the first natural barrier to capital accumulation. Every meal testified to the shared destiny of the horde. Eating alone wasn't a right, it was a death sentence. To isolate from the communal meal was to isolate from the group's protection. In this profound simplicity, we find the purest form of property, a right of use inseparable from the act of living together. The earth offered its fruits to all who wandered its paths. Trespassing was as alien a concept as rent. Humanity's first relationship with the world was total, unmediated, complete participation in the bounty of the wild. 3. The absence of individual property in savage tribes. To the modern mind, this absence feels like a void, a missing piece of civilization. Yet for savage tribes, this void was the glue holding humanity together. Ethnologists like Lewis Henry Morgan studied these early groups. Friedrich Engels built theories around them. What they found was remarkable: a society where private property was not only unknown, but practically impossible. In these tribes, the community was the only legal person. The individual existed only as a member of the gens, of the clan, like a finger as part of a hand. If a hunter fashioned a flint scraper or a woman wove a basket, these weren't personal assets. They couldn't be traded or sold. They were functional extensions of the tribe's collective power. The logic was simple and brutal. The solitary individual was a dead individual. Any claim to exclusive ownership of survival means would threaten the group's existence. This was rooted in what we call organic solidarity. Even as tools became complex, they remained communal. When dwellings were constructed, they were longhouses, communal halls where families lived under one roof, sharing a single hearth. In such an environment, privacy didn't exist. No locked doors, no secret chests, no private plots of land. Wealth wasn't measured by possessions. It was measured by the tribe's vitality and size. This reveals a profound psychological truth. The human ego hadn't yet separated from the collective we. A tribesman didn't think, "This is my spear." He thought, "This is the spear with which we hunt." Prestige didn't come from accumulating goods. There were no goods to accumulate. It came from distributing resources, from ensuring the group's prosperity. Scholar Émile de Lavallée notes something fascinating. The further back in history we go, the more we find land and resources held in a state of indivision. Even the language of these tribes lacked possessive pronouns, the ones that dominate our modern speech. Ownership was a right of use granted by the community. If an object wasn't being used by one, it was available to another. This wasn't charity, it was fundamental law. By removing the friction of mine and thine, savage tribes achieved something remarkable, a level of social cohesion that modern society, with all its legal complexities, struggles to replicate. The absence of property was actually the presence of total unity, unyielding unity. 4. Joint ownership of the earliest movable tools. As the human mind evolved, so did its hands. The transition was monumental, from gathering wild fruits to crafting the first stone scrapers, clubs, spears. But here's the mistake we often make. We assume the first person to sharpen a flint claimed it as personal property. Wrong. In the logic of the primeval group, the tool wasn't individual wealth, it was an organ of the tribe's collective body. Examine the earliest movable wealth, the implements of labor. What we see is joint ownership that's almost biological. A spear was fashioned by an individual, perhaps, but its purpose, the tribal hunt. The labor invested in creating a tool was a contribution to the group's survival, not a means to exert power over peers. If a hunter possessed a bow, he didn't own it, not in our sense. He couldn't withhold it from the hunt or trade it for personal gain. The tool belonged to the hand that used it, only so long as that hand served the community. Lavallée describes this as the law of indivision. In primitive cultures, Eskimos or Amazon tribes, if an object wasn't in immediate use, it was common to all. A man might have his own knife, but if his neighbor needed it to carve meat for the communal meal, refusing was unthinkable. To refuse sharing a tool was to break the sacred bond of the gens. Accumulating 100 spears while others went empty-handed, that would have been viewed as madness, a social disease. These early tools often carried spiritual significance beyond the individual. A carved club wasn't just wood and stone. It was a vessel for the tribe's ancestral strength. Ownership was stewardship. The movable nature of these objects didn't lead to markets, it led to circulation of gifts. As philosopher Proudhon later reflected, the right to the product was tied to social participation. The tool was a bridge between humans, not a wall. This joint ownership ensured something crucial. No single individual could monopolize the means of production. By keeping survival instruments in collective hands, early humans prevented something: the rise of classes, the exploitation of man by man. For tens of thousands of years, the flint and the bone were common heritage, sharpened by the labor of one, but held by the strength of all. 5. Social unity as a precursor to property rights. We arrive now to a fundamental truth, one that challenges the core of modern legal thought. Property is not a natural phenomenon, it's a social one. Before property rights, there was social unity. At humanity's dawn, the bond between tribe members was absolute. So absolute that legal definitions of ownership didn't exist, they weren't needed. The group didn't own land or tools because they had a right to them. They possessed them because they were inseparable from the group's collective existence. This social unity was founded on what Friedrich Engels calls the gens, the lineage system. Every member tied to the other by blood. This blood tie was the primary regulatory force. Within the gens, there was no state, no police to enforce ownership. The common interest was the only interest. If a tribe member fell hungry, the group was hungry. If a member was cold, the group was cold. The right of an individual to share common resources wasn't a legal claim. It was a biological necessity, social necessity. Émile de la Vallée illustrates this masterfully. The history of property is the history of this original unity slowly dissolving. We often view property rights as progress, yet in this primeval state, the absence of such rights signaled total social health. No legal fiction was required to explain why one man shouldn't starve while another feasted on surplus. The right to life was synonymous with the right to use tribal assets. This was spontaneous communism, where holding a title deed against your own kin would be the highest betrayal. This precursor to property, this absolute social cohesion, sets the stage for everything that follows. As the tribe grows, as tools become complex, as humans begin to settle, this unity begins to fracture. The we starts breaking into many I's. The journey of this book is the story of how humanity moved from total belonging to total exclusion. To understand the fences of the future, we must first remember the boundless unity of our past.